The empire is forming out of the ashes of the fallen republic. You see, the Roman Empire is rising out of the once great rule of Julius Caesar, who has now been betrayed. And Octavian is being crowned Caesar Augustus 27 years before Christ. The empire had expanded well beyond the borders of its control by this point, and so Augustus, now that he's in charge, needs to establish rule quickly, effectively, and peacefully, and he has an idea. He appoints leaders from around the empire to govern major portions of this vast Roman landscape. These kings are called ethnarchs, having their ethnicity match the regions they oversaw. You see, in Judea, Herod the Great is taking rule. The Herodian Dynasty, raptured into the fallen governance of a soon crumbling nation. It began in bloodshed. It began in ruin. It began in hatred. The same way the story will end. How long, O Lord? How long will the nations rage in vain? When will there be the everlasting rule of a good and wise king? Let's explore. Even though Herod the Great had become governor of the Judean realm around 47 BC, during the civil wars of Octavian, which was 20 years before the empire had been established, he hedged his bets with the strong military conqueror, and Herod wins out favorably with the now Emperor Augustus. While his early reign was marked by a treacherous scheming of adversaries, Herod's rule is mostly remembered for the prosperity he wrought throughout his domain. You see, when Herod sided with Octavian during the Roman wars, he quickly made enemies on all sides, political and religious. The aristocracy, for example, of the Levant despised Herod's association with Octavian. Cleopatra similarly hated him for his friendship with the emperor, since she obviously was rooting for her love, Antony, to win out as Caesar. And when he doesn't, Antony and Cleopatra die by suicide. However, Herod also made adversaries on the religious front. On the one hand, Herod was Idumean, or half-Jewish, rejecting much of Jewish culture and practices in favor of gaining power among the Roman Empire. While at the same time, the powerful Hasmonean family did not favor Herod, because as soon as Herod gained power, he put all the wrong people under him, including rejecting any Hasmonean from becoming high priest. Once Herod quelled the usurpation of his enemies early in his political career, his reign was largely marked by prosperity. You see, Herod built large towns, injected Hellenism into the Judean culture, and even married. Well, at least married for the first time. It was these reasons and many others that gave the Jewish community throughout the Levant all the more reason to revolt against this unruly king. A man who gave no care or thought to their traditions, yet claimed to be Jewish himself when politically apt to do so. The season of prosperity through Herod's reign quickly gave way to turbulent violence as his mind began to give way to insanity. Herod married 5 other wives and had many children with all of them. This created an innumerable excess of succession issues for the Herodian family, and why there's so much confusion throughout the New Testament. Along with this, there was a great number of domestic problems. Mothers hated sons, sons hated brothers, and Herod hated almost all of them. So, when his oldest son, Antipater, also known as Aristobulus IV, tried and failed to poison his father in order to take control of his throne, Herod had the rebellious traitor exiled, leaving behind his oldest son, Herod Agrippa I and Antipater's daughter, Herodias, who Herod married off to Herod II, key players throughout the New Testament. Since Antipater had turned Herod against his next two oldest sons, Archelaus and Philip, Herod promptly rewrote his will to put his youngest son, Antipas, in charge as king over his kingdom. Meanwhile, in the small town of Bethlehem, another king is being born, and mysterious men from the east have come to Herod asking about the whereabouts of the boy. When they find the boy lying in a manger, they anoint him as the true king of Israel, and then warn the family not to go back to Herod's empire. Soon, Herod dies, and his will was foregone. The people elected Archelaus as king over Judea, though no doubt wanting to maintain their power, Philip and Antipas were made tetrarch, a position that was much like a governor over various provinces within the kingdom. If Herod's rule was marked by trouble, Archelaus's reign was no different. His governance was peppered with violent revolts, coups, military campaigns. He grew to be a ruthless dictator over the Judean countryside. Eventually, his tyranny culminated on Pentecost in 4 AD, when a disastrous revolt of the Israeli people led him to burn down the temple portico and pillage the temple space. As the dust settled on this bloody battle, many saw this as the abomination of the desolation and began to eagerly await Daniel's prophesied Messiah, who was sure to liberate them and establish his final rule over the Israelite people. After the failures of Archelaus to maintain any semblance of control over his empire, a select host of Jewish and Samaritan men band together, travel to Rome, and advocate that Archelaus be formally exiled from his rule. Given that two sworn enemies, Jewish and Samaritan, banded together to accomplish this feat, and no doubt Philip and Antipas were behind this as well, the Roman Empire listens. And in 6 AD, Archelaus is formally exiled. This, however, had a bit of a reverse effect for the Jewish community in Israel at the time. Jerusalem, and by extension all of Israel, officially became occupied by Rome. When, after Archelaus was exiled, a man by the name of Pontius Pilate took over as prefect in the Jewish colony. Meanwhile, Antipas and Philip remained on their thrones as tetrarchs, or governors. While their territories may not have seen as much physical brutality as Archelaus did, they no doubt sowed the seeds of perversion and injustice throughout their kingdoms. Herod Antipas is likely the Herodian that readers of the New Testament are most familiar with. As Herod's youngest son, he was given governance over Galilee and Perea, the regions where Jesus ended up doing most of his ministry work. Therefore, Antipas had some key encounters with the Messianic king that led to Antipas's downfall and Jesus' reign. Antipas set up his capital city in Tiberias, a town he had built after destroying a cemetery 4 miles away from the small town of Nazareth. Ceremonially, Jewish men and women were not allowed to live in this city, having become unclean after the desolation of the cemetery. Though, many did have to work in this large Roman town. It's likely that a Nazarene by the name of Joseph, the father of Jesus, would have had to sell his goods and trades in this Herodian town. After Antipas built Tiberias, he too fell in love like his father, but in this case, Antipas was already married when he fell in love, and he fell in love with his brother Herod II's wife, the woman who was also his niece by Antipater. And her name just so happened to be Herodias, the female version of Herod Antipas's very own name. After having a child, Salome, with Herod II, Herodias abandons Herod II and Salome for Antipas. When they are wed, John the Baptist is captured, and it is this marriage that John speaks so vehemently against. You see, Herodias hated John the Baptist, and when she sets up a birthday party for Antipas, she forces Salome, her abandoned daughter, to dance provocatively for Antipas. And when he is aroused, he gives her whatever she wishes. And so, being swayed by her mother, Salome requests the head of John the Baptist. And Herod Antipas complies, killing the man of God. Soon after John's death, Antipas begins to grow paranoid. He remembers the boy that was born under the rule of his father. He hears of the works he's been doing in his kingdom, and he likely fears that his rule will be overthrown by a member of his family if God doesn't avenge John the Baptist first. Which is why Mark notes a rather sarcastic remark made by Herod in Mark chapter 6, when Antipas says that Jesus must be John reincarnate after hearing of Jesus' miracles. This would also explain his rather vacillate stance on the Son of God, who he tries to murder. Luke writes, "Some Pharisees came and told Jesus, 'Go, get out of here. Herod Antipas wants to kill you.' Well, Jesus said to them, 'You go and tell that fox, look, I'm driving out demons and performing healings today and tomorrow, and on the third day, I will complete my work.'" A sly nod to the true work of a king, no doubt. But as Luke continues, he recounts the story of Pilate, who sends Jesus right into Antipas's kingdom. Herod was very glad to see Jesus. For a long time, he had wanted to see him because he had heard about him and was hoping to see some miracles performed by him. Either that, or Antipas wanted to make sure that Jesus was no threat after all. So, Herod kept asking him questions, but Jesus did not answer him. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing Jesus, and then Herod Antipas, with his soldiers, threatened him with contempt, mocked him, dressed him in bright clothing, and sent him back to Pilate. That very day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Previously, they had been enemies. Soon after this encounter, stirrings of Jesus begin to blow through Herod's kingdom. But Antipas has no time for this. You see, after a violent defeat at the hands of his ex-father-in-law, his mistress, now wife Herodias, convinces Antipas to denounce the new Caesar Caligula publicly, leading to Antipas's inevitable exile. Herodias is married to Philip. While Antipas reigned in the south, his brother Philip was busy ruling over the northeastern region of Herod's once great kingdom. Philip's rule over the region was largely peaceful, being the governor of mostly Greek and Syrian territories who did not have such strict religious customs as the Jews. Interestingly, Philip built some major cities that are seen throughout the New Testament, like Caesarea Philippi, where Peter confesses Jesus to be the Christ, and Bethsaida, which Philip renamed to Julius, but it's where Jesus healed a blind man and fed 5,000 people in the countryside. But when Herodias is married to Philip, she convinces him to begin expanding his empire. The Roman Caesar Caligula, already not a fan of the duo, exiles them as well. When Philip is exiled, Emperor Caligula makes Agrippa I ruler over the Judean landscape. This, and his son Agrippa II, are the Herods seen throughout the book of Acts. When Agrippa I took charge after Philip in the northern territories, he designed a brutal system of persecution for early Christians who were going about his territories, proclaiming that a new king, Jesus, was in charge and freely forgiving wrongs committed by the people throughout his kingdom. In response to this, Agrippa I killed the Apostle James and imprisoned Peter, though Peter was miraculously set free, and eventually he goes to Rome. When, on an appointed day, dressed in royal robes and seated on the throne, Herod delivered a speech to the people of his kingdom. The assembled people began to shout, "It's the voice of a god, not of a man!" At once, an angel of the Lord struck him, because he did not give the glory to God, and he was eaten by worms and died. But the word of God spread and multiplied. When Agrippa I is eaten by worms, his son Agrippa II takes over. His rule is relatively useless for our conversation, having had most of his reign occupied with the Palestinian revolts of AD 66 to 70. Fulfilling the prophetic words of Jesus that not one stone of the temple would be left unturned. After Agrippa II sentences Paul to Rome for trial, and Nero dies, Agrippa II ends the Herodian Empire that lasted for nearly 147 years. But, like all empires, eventually ended, heralding the cry of prophets from centuries past, of a kingdom, an everlasting kingdom, whose dominion endures throughout all generations. A king whose offspring will continue forever, who is like the moon established forever, a faithful witness in the sky. A king who will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. Not a king of chaos that brings ruin and destruction to his kingdom, but a king whose power does not come from ancestry or money or land, but from above. For the people of Israel needed a king who was God. A king who would not leave them or forsake them, but become one of them. A king who in every respect had been tempted as they were, yet without sin. A king who was the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. And that king was the king who had been born under the reign of Herod the Great. This was Bible Unbound. We'll see you next time.